How are we doing? Good. Glad to hear it or see it in the thumbs up. Are we excited about tomorrow? Test day. It's the best day. Fine. You don't have to share my enthusiasm, but you're missing out. Come on, Kyra. Tests are fun. It's when you get to show everybody how smart you are. Um, okay. Getting several thumbs down. Oh well. Um, so TK, I made you co-host. I'm gonna rely on you to kind of monitor chat and those things. Um, say a little bit about the test and then just open it up for questions. It looks pretty much just like I said it would. You're gonna have to answer 20 multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank type questions. There will be some level of choice there, so I might give you 22 or 23 questions. Remember that your best 20 count, so there's no reason not to answer them all. You will not be penalized. You can, if I give you 23, you can miss 3, and you've still got full credit for that section. The short answer will be 4 or 5 questions. I haven't fully decided yet on the number or whether or not there'll be any choice involved. I still have not selected the student question, but it will definitely be on there for those of you who have submitted one. I will hopefully have the exam printed. There's some issues with the Abernethy printer right now, but I guess I'll just stay here tonight until I get that figured out. But so you don't need to bring anything to write on. You just need to bring a pen or a pencil, and remember to bring a calculator. And in terms of calculator, it should be a scientific calculator to make your life easier. I suppose you can do it with one of the standard little tiny ones, but it would not be particularly fun. You have the full 3 hours, obviously, to take the exam. It's designed to take an average of about an hour and 15 minutes. And so, what that normally means is some enterprising folk turn it in about 45 minutes, and most people turn it in around an hour and 15. But you do have the full 3 hours, so don't worry about that. Any questions on the structure of the exam? I'm just going to turn off my air conditioner real quick. Maybe. Leah?
For the short answer, are we expected to do like the normal 4 to 5 sentences, or do you have a different expectation? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's generally the 4 to 5 sentence. Um, I will say that one of the questions that I have written already is a little bit longer than that. Uh, and I'm trying to figure out a way to cut it down some, but have so far been unsuccessful. But it's all part of the timing of how it's planned out. Um, Jay?
So for the formulas we need to know, do we just need to know the net present value and like how to do expected value, or is there like other stuff we need to know?
No, those are the only formulae on there. Um, so, Hunter,
For any calculations we'll need to do, will we have to elaborate for everyone, or is it acceptable if we like just have the calculation and the answer there?
so you went out a little bit at the beginning of that, but
All right. So like if we are doing calculations on a problem, like if we're calculating NPV, is it acceptable for us to just have the calculations, or do we always have to have some kind of like sentence elaboration going alongside the numbers?
no, the calculations should be sufficient. You know, it's there's calculations and there's calculations, right? You can show different levels, um, and as long as it's clear to us what it is that you're doing, if for some reason something gets messed up, the key there is being able to get some partial credit.
Gotcha.
Um, but there's definitely at least one question on there where it can pretty much be numbers until the end. So, Celia,
Would it be possible to go over some of the problems in problem set 4?
yes, yeah. Let me take care of any of like administrative questions, and then we can jump into that.
Okay, sweet.
Okay. Yeah. Shayna.
I just had two questions. The first one about rounding. What would you like us to round to for any of the number problems?
If you go to two decimal places, that's plenty.
Mhm. And
Um,
then um, my second question was, would we be docked points if we did have more than five sentences? Because I know you said in one of the cases of the problems, it's even longer than, normally.
no, no. I mean, you should feel like you can write as much, as you feel like you need to. And there will be some extra space on the exam. I'm not forcing you to fit it into a certain, space on the exam. There will be some extra space, and then if you need extra paper, we can always give you extra paper. Um,
Okay.
uh, but it's just more that most of them can be answered in 4 to 5 sentences.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Abigail?
So it's closed note, but it's not cumulative, right?
That is correct. With the exception that I expect everyone to understand Calder Hicks as sort of a foundation for cost benefit analysis. Um, but, and, it's not like you can forget what the different policy tools are. Um, you might have to do an evaluation of different policy tools or suggest different policies, to remedy, for example, a market failure. Something along those lines. Buyer?
Oh, hi, Professor. I just have a question on the practice problems, like this first practice problems and because I think it's kind of weird for me because the expected cost is counted twice. But let me pull up my screen.
Well, I can't see your screen.
No, I can share.
Um,
Yeah.
well, I which problem are you talking about specifically?
So it's there's like extra exercise problems for CBA, uh, and
The
yeah, there's two questions. The first question is, or maybe I can like type in the chat. So I see
um,
the solution.
it's okay. I can try to pull it up and we can look at it and see. Um, but any other questions about the exam format or the process itself? Um, so Joshua put a question in the chat about the 5% quiz and participation grade. That is an excellent question. Um, Basically, you're getting lucky on that. And the only thing I really have to go on there is the alternative assignment that I gave you at one point. That being said, I know who's in class, I know who's not in class, but pretty much everybody's going to be getting at least 4 out of those 5 points. It's just the way the semester went with some people in class and some people not in class. I really wasn't able to do the quizzes that I anticipated being able to do, and so in the end, that's just free points essentially. Okay. Let me see if I can bring up problem set 4, and then we can look at the extra ones. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the actual templates that are posted. As I'm getting this going, Celia, were there particular questions that you had on?
I was hoping that we could look at the first and second ones, and maybe the fourth one.
Okay. So can y'all see this? The first question is relatively straightforward, and then I'm giving you the construction costs, and then you're essentially looking at an either or option as to whether or not there's a bunch of lawsuits. So this is really just an expected value scenario, where you have the initial construction costs, and then that needs to be added to the potential costs of lawsuits. So this was just kind of an introductory way to get you doing expected value on one side of the equation. Was there a specific part of it that was confusing?
I guess I was wondering why we were given the right of way costs for both options if we didn't really use them.
Yeah, you were given it because it's still going to cost money, even if there aren't lawsuits, right? It's just a smaller percentage.
We only have to use them for the expected value, but we don't have to add them to anything at the end.
No, so if you see in the answer, you have the 15 million, and then you have the 4 million times the 25% chance that there aren't any lawsuits, right? And you can think about that as like transaction costs, or something like that. And then you have the larger chance that there are lawsuits, and so then you just have to add all those together to get to the cost being $25 million. Yeah. The second question, obviously you have already the cost of the bike lanes from question 1. I give you the costs of the soccer complex, and then I ask you a question that essentially I don't give you enough information to answer completely. And so what I did give you, you can use, and it's a valid measure. It's just not really measuring the monetary benefits of each project, right? So what you would do is just figure out the cost per person, yeah, and recommend the one that costs the least per person. And then that leads into question 3. Okay, that's like, hey, I know you were super confused on question 2, but here's the deal: I didn't give you a way to calculate the monetary cost, the monetary benefits. So how would you do that? What would be a way that you could calculate the actual benefit so that you could do a CBA? Right. So all 3 of these questions are really meant to sort of get you acclimated to what's necessary to do a CBA, and start recognizing when you don't have enough information, and then how you might get that information. You had another question on this problem set. Which one was it?
6.
6? Before I get to 6, I want to talk a little bit about number 4, just because there have been some people emailing me about 4. The answer on here is the answer, that I think is sort of the obvious way to go about it. But the bottom line is, both of these projects, once you do the CBA, they have the exact same cost, and they're both negative. Right? The costs outweigh the benefits in both cases by $5 million, I believe it is. So then the question becomes, okay, well, if we're going to do one of these, which one should we choose? And from my perspective, because I take the approach that the best alternative is the most effective, then I would choose option 1, because it's reducing congestion by 40% versus 30%. Okay. If you recommended the second project, for example, if you did the ratio, and you use the ratio to argue that the second one would be better, you should have gotten credit for that. And I know some people didn't. So if you didn't, then feel free to email me and let me know so that I can take a look at it. It will be a couple of days until I get to those requests, but I do know that there were some that I've already corrected, so I assume that there would be more. Abigail, do you have a question about that?
Yeah, so I had a question. So for that one, like if you recommended neither because the costs were higher than the benefits, would that not be correct?
It's something that you shouldn't have lost all of the points, for sure. The question asks you which one to do, right? So I am looking for one or the other as to a recommendation. But obviously it's not completely unreasonable to be like, neither one passes. Let's spend our money somewhere else. But so it would be, it depends on how many points you got taken off. But that's something I would be happy to look at. Yeah. Okay, number 6. That was the next one, Celia?
Number 6.
Okay. So what is your question on this one?
I guess like if we could just go through and sort of like solve it out, because I think I just did the math a little bit wrong.
Right. So to start with, always try to see, do we have either the costs or the benefits in net present value? And in this situation, you have the cost. Okay, it's $100 billion. Then I give you this whole range of possible benefits. Okay, and I give you 2 different benefits, one that accrues over 50 years and one that accrues over 100 years. And so what you need to do is you need to calculate the net present value of each of those benefits, right, using the different discount rates, and then you add them together. So I'm looking at the $200 billion over 50 years, and then you add in the $500 billion over 100 years, which gets you to the 38 in the first one. But the key is understanding that there's two different sets of benefits, right? And so you need to, calculate the net present value of each one, and then you need to add them together. You can sort of contrast that with a situation where I give you essentially an expected value scenario for the benefits, but the benefits are all accruing over the same number of years. In that situation, you want to calculate the expected value first and then plug it into the NPV formula, right? That becomes the N.
So how do we know? I see that you wrote like Calder-Hicks improving versus not Calder-Hicks improving. How did you make that conclusion?
If the benefits outweigh the costs, it's Calder-Hicks improving. So Calder-Hicks improving and passing a cost-benefit test are synonymous.
I think you cut out for me. What was that?
Oh, I just said okay. Were there any other questions on this problem set while I have it up?
Could we go over number 5?
Sure. Sorry, I'm just looking through the chat. Looks like it's taken care of. I mean, number 5 is just really, conceptual in nature of what a higher and a lower discount rate means. And what we've said is that a higher discount rate indicates a relatively greater concern for future consumption or future for current consumption or current welfare. You can use those sort of interchangeably here, compared to a lower discount rate. Right? A lower discount rate is indicating a relatively greater concern with future consumption, future welfare, right, compared to a higher discount rate. And again, I really encourage you to internalize the net present value formula, because when you do that and you see what happens to N with a higher and a lower discount rate, you're going to see that number gets bigger or smaller, and that indicates how much we care about the future. Jay?
Thank you.
Sure.
So, for a lot of the things in the study guide, like I wrote down, I guess, like numbers of things. So like 6 assumptions of like market theory, or like 10 factors of price elasticity. So while we're studying, would you recommend that we like memorize those numbered things, or do you think it'd be better to just like understand the concept?
No, that's the kind of thing you need to memorize.
Okay.
Yeah, because you need to know what the assumptions of market theory are, in order to answer all kinds of other questions. And who knows, maybe I'll just give you a question about the assumptions of market theory. So my multiple choice true false questions, they range from kind of a regurgitation, sort of testing the memorization aspect of it, to much more applied, formats. But if you go back to Bloom's taxonomy, right, you can't progress up the scale unless you've memorized everything that you need to memorize.
Thank you.
Sure. Shayna?
My question was about something that you said in class at one point, and I was wondering if you could explain it one more time. It was
Maybe.
even if the risk itself is low, that something bad will happen in the next 30 years, but the outcome is so bad, you might want to actually keep a low discount rate. Could you explain what that means one more time?
Well, so that would be something, like a cost, some horrendous cost, happening in the future. You might want to use a lower discount rate because of the whole risk aversion that we have as human beings. So to get an accurate sort of projection of how we would internalize that particular cost, it would make sense to use a lower discount rate because we do care so much about these catastrophic losses.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Woo? Okay.
I have a question about behavioral economics.
Okay.
So, should we be able to define each of availability, affect, and status quo biases?
It's a good idea, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Abigail?
Can you explain the substitution versus income effect again?
Sure. So the substitution effect, right, is going to be related to elasticity, and it's a measure of how much we're substituting other goods for whatever good whose price just went up. Yeah. Another way to think about it is, sort of maintaining the same level of utility. How would our consumption of whatever this bundle of goods is change? But sort of same level of utility. Income effect is when we're changing the level of utility. So with a tax, it's bringing us from a higher utility to a lower utility. Yeah, with a subsidy, it would be the opposite. And it's related to the compensation principle, right? How much would we have to compensate people to get them back to their original level of utility? Okay. Woo, are you ready to go?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so could you go over problem 9 in problem set 4?
Sure. Okay. So 9 is, essentially just asking you what type of evaluation am I doing here? And the key is to look, one good way to approach this kind of problem is kind of to knock out, answers that are just clearly wrong. So it says I'm using data from 2010 and only from 2010. So it's not time series. Yeah. Discontinuity would be if I was looking at people just above and just below, let's say, the income eligibility line. But I'm not. I'm looking to people who are income eligible, who are receiving SNAP, and people who are income eligible who are not receiving SNAP. Yeah. There's nothing, sort of natural about that. There's some significant reason why some people don't use food stamps. It's called the take-up rate is the technical term. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a control group that's as close as possible to the treatment group. But there's no way I can get it the exact same. Right? So it's a non-equivalent control group.
So when will the natural experiment exist? Like, is that
That would be
is
that would be
because
I would say that would be a situation where something outside of our control is allowing us to essentially randomly assign participants into treatment and control.
oh, so in this case, actually there is no random assignment, right? Okay,
No random
gotcha.
assignment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. TK, anything in the chat?
Yes, Julia asked a good question about, let me actually just scroll up to it. Will there be graph supply/demand that we will have to interpret and answer?
Yes.
Julia, yes.
There will be, and you'll have to identify income effect and substitution effect and that kind of thing. So it'll be that kind of graph. Okay. I haven't forgotten about you, Buyer. I just got to find the right file on my computer. Any other questions while I'm messing around with this? Shana?
Abigail, sorry,
Oh,
there's a question in the chat that just popped up. Abigail is wondering, what does it mean by applying incommensurable criteria? I almost couldn't say that.
right. Yeah, it's a hard word to say. It really is. Incommensurable just means you're not able to directly compare them. So if you think about a situation where you have 3 criteria and you have 3 alternatives and none of the alternatives are dominant, meaning they win on all 3 criteria, unless those criteria are all measured in the same unit, like dollars, well, they're incommensurable. You can't directly compare them. So you think about something like political feasibility, right? You can't really put that into dollar format. So, you might have a situation where there's a really effective option that's not very political feasible. There's a less effective option that's really politically feasible. And so at that point, you just have to make a decision as to what's the most important to you. Right? And you just have to say what that is. Okay. Icy?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is there any way, like I know you just talked about questions 2 and 6, but I really just can't understand it from hearing about it. Is there any way you could like work it out and kind of describe like the numbers and everything while you do it?
I can try. I mean, I can use the template and try to talk it through using the numbers that are there. Um, there is some whiteboard option that I'm honestly completely unfamiliar with. Um, but let me pull it back up. Okay, so with number 2, right? You're trying to figure out some way to measure, some way to compare these two projects. The actual numbers that you have to do this are the costs, right, of each project, and then the number of people who they're going to serve. So the only real measure that you can do is to figure out, okay, how much does it cost per person? There just isn't any other information within the question itself to let you do anything different. Yeah. You're not going to have a question like this on the exam. This, again, is sort of part of me kind of building up in the problem set of being able to identify what information we have and what additional information we would need in order to do a cost benefit analysis. And that's what number 3 is sort of hammering home, is like, well, we need some monetary measure of the benefits. And what can we do there? And there are several options that we talked about in class. It can be contingent valuation. Maybe we could figure out some way to do hedonic pricing. That type of thing. Does that help? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'll just email you later about it.
Okay. And then number 6, was that the other one that you had a question on?
Yes.
So number 6, so it starts again with identifying what we know and what's in net present value and what's not. So I read up here, invest $100 billion today. So that tells me that the costs are $100 billion in net present value because it's today, it's current. So then I have to look at, okay, well, what are the benefits that he's talking about here? And there's this $200 billion of benefits in 50 years and an additional $500 billion in 100 years. And then I give you the discount rate to use. So when I give you the discount rate, then obviously that's a Q that you're going to have to use the net present value formula to figure this out. So what I do here is I take the $200 billion and then I divide that by 1 plus the discount rate, 4%, which we put in as 0.04, to the 50th power because it's over 50 years. And then I'm adding in the second $500 billion in benefit with the same discount rate that accrues over 100 years. And when I do that, this is what I end up with. Okay, roughly $38 billion, which is significantly less than the $100 billion in costs. So it's not Calder-Hicks improving. It doesn't pass the cost benefit test. And then I just do the exact same thing with the 2% discount rate. And I see, right, like there's a gigantic difference. It goes from 38 to 143 just by changing the discount rate by 2%. Now, the reason that is such a huge difference is because these benefits accrue over such a long period of time. So again, really, understanding the formula and understanding how changes in the discount rate, understanding, how changes in the time, the exponent t, what that does to the output of the formula. So in this last situation, it's 143, that's greater than 100, so it is Calder-Hicks improving, it passes the cost benefit test.
Just to make sure, because so whichever value is greater than the initial cost is going to be the Calder-Hicks improving.
Yeah, whenever the benefits are bigger than the costs.
I think I understand much more.
Okay, good. Shayna, I think you were next.
Thank you. I had a question on problem set 3 with the utility curve that we had to use. Just the flip side of that, if we were given a subsidy, could you explain the income effect and the substitution effect?
Sorry, I'm just
No, you're
looking
fine.
to pull see if I have it up. Yeah, so you're gonna have to engage in some mental switcheroo here. Let's pretend that B2 is B1. Okay, and we're starting at point B. And then we put a subsidy on good X so that our budget line rotates out. Because X is relatively cheaper now than everything else. Okay, so what that does is it brings us from point B to point A. Right, and we're on a higher utility curve. Yeah. We're consuming a lot more of good X and a little bit less of everything else. Right, compared to point B. Yeah. So that essentially, right? So then we want to figure out, well, what would it take to go back to the original utility curve using this new budget constraint. Yeah, it's hard to do reverse on a graph, honestly.
Yeah.
But that's what you would want to do is be like, well, okay, what if we go back to the original utility curve? And the difference between the original point and that new point on the original utility curve, that would be your substitution effect. And the point from the original utility curve to the new utility curve, that would be your income effect.
So it would be switched from what it is now.
Sort of. Yeah. And lots of times what you'll see with the subsidy is, what some people would call the total effect, right? The whole thing is actually the substitution effect. And the income effect is just a part of it.
Okay.
As opposed to them being separate.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that.
Sure. Sneha?
Hello. I had 2 questions. So first, this is about the exact same question. Could you just go over how we understand and solve for B and C? Because I think I just am overall confused about finding those points and understanding why they are what they are.
Sure. So, with all these graphs, you always want to just start at the beginning. Yeah. So you're looking at this and it's a graph of X, versus everything else, all other goods. and you look at that original budget constraint, B1, and you find that point where it's just touching the utility curve. So we're starting at point A. Okay. Then what happens is we're putting a tax on good X. We want people to consume less of good X. Okay. That rotates the budget line in to this new B2. And it rotates it, right? It doesn't just shift the whole thing down, because we could still spend all of our money on everything but X and have the same amount of everything but X. Yeah. So then we have to identify where a utility curve or indifference curve is just touching this new budget constraint, and that's point B. Right? So we're going from point A to point B. And that's where we end up. Right? From a policy perspective, we've gone from point A to point B, where they're consuming a lot less of good X and a little bit more of everything else. Okay? Well, what we want to know is, what would we have to do? How much would we have to compensate them to get them back to the original level of utility that they had at point A? And the way we do that is we draw this sort of imaginary budget constraint that's parallel to B2, and that's just touching that same utility curve that point A is on. Right? And so that brings us to point C. Okay. So we would have to compensate people the amount between point B and point C to get them to the same utility level. Okay. That's the income effect. Okay. Even with that income effect, and even though they're at the same utility level, there's still a dramatic change in their consumption bundle. Right? They're still consuming a lot less of good X, but they're consuming a lot more of everything else. So the difference between A and C is the substitution effect. Right? So they have the same level of utility, but their consumption has changed, and that indicates substitution. Sorry about that loud noise.
You're good. Thank you. That was helpful. I think I understand it better. And then I was wondering if you could give an example of what race to the bottom diffusion would look like, and how that might be similar or different to competition.
I could. I mean, race to the bottom is usually associated with welfare programs, where it's seen as helping out sort of bottom tier people, and the government's trying to avoid that because it costs a lot of money and that kind of thing. I mean, I'll just go ahead and tell y'all, like, I'm not gonna ask you about very like specific theories of diffusion. You're not gonna have to give me an example of race to the bottom. You know, if you know that the traditional sort of example is, you know, welfare policies, sort of portfolios of welfare policies, and this idea that people vote with their feet, that they'll move where the policies benefit them the most. Yeah. Then that's good enough. And it's directly related to competition, right? Because if you think about economic incentives, tax incentives that we give businesses, they're essentially, you know, voting with their feet by going wherever they're going to give them the best deal. And that competition between states, between localities, is kind of its own race to the bottom. Because you're just making each other spend a whole lot more money, and in the end, you're going to end up losing out.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Gabe?
Distinguish between use and non-use value.
Yeah, I mean, use value is something that we can directly observe, right? I went to this park and I use the slide or whatever it is. Non-use value is everything that we can't directly observe. Like, I know that there is a slide at that park, and it makes me happy to know that I could go slide down there if I was feeling particularly sad one day. But I don't ever actually use it. But the mere fact that it's there is still important to me. And there's all kinds of things. So non-use value typically comes up in the context of environmental policy. In other realms of policy, you may call it non-economic value. Something along those lines. But it's just really, am I actually using this thing, or do I just care that it exists?
Okay, and that's important for valuation, right?
Yeah, because any of the revealed preferences, like the revealed preference approaches that we could do, like hedonic pricing, travel costs, and that stuff, none of that gets at non-use value. The only way we can measure non-use value is through contingent valuation.
Okay, thank you.
Cloris?
Yeah, I have a question about the CBA question 1 and the extra practice problems. I'm just like,
Okay, yeah, Bayer wanted me to pull those up too, and I just got to find them on this computer.
I have them pulled up, so like if you
That's
give me
okay, I got it.
space. Okay.
All right, can y'all see that now?
Yeah. So
Which question 2?
question 1, I'm just confused on the where the values for the benefits come from for the EVA equation, because I'm confused why the 0.1 times 50 is included in that. That's for the dam.
Well, you're subtracting out the damage from a flood that's going to happen, sort of 10% of the time. Right, so I say that there's a 10% chance of a major flood in the next 20 years. All right, if we build it, it's going to cost this, and we have these damages. If we don't build the dam and there is a flood, right, we'll have $200 million in damages. The benefits here are the benefits from from building the dam minus not building the dam minus building the dam. Does that make sense?
I'm like confused because isn't the so the 50 times 0.1, isn't that a cost though? That's what we'll lose if we do not build it, or if we do build a dam.
Right. It is a cost, but it's also a benefit if we don't build it.
Okay. And then for the same question, I just have so for this question, why can't you just evaluate the cost for both building the dam and not building the dam, and then seeing that because one is going to have a greater cost, just pick the one with the lower cost?
Sorry, you went out a little bit on on your last
Oh,
sentence.
sorry. So I was just saying, like, if you were to find the cost to build the dam and the cost to not build the dam, why can't we just do that and like pick the one that has a lower cost? Because then overall they're more efficient or more effective use of money.
Well, because you still have to figure out the benefits.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I asked my question too. So, I mean, like the question is like I can do it either way, but the problem is that count it twice. The 15 times 0.1. So you counted both in the
Yeah,
benefits.
that's in addition to the costs. It's a subtraction to the benefits.
Elaborate that more, like if you already like you already figured out the net benefits in the first like 15, then why is appear scanning the costs? Like the cost is maybe like the net cost is just like the $10 million bridge. That's the only difference. If we are comparing the difference.
No, because there's still going to be, even if we build the dam, there's still going to be damages if there's a flood.
Then if we count it like in the cost, maybe we shouldn't count it in the benefits, because like it's still you already counted like the 200 times 0.1 in the scenario that there's no bridge, there's no dam.
Well, I would see it as an opportunity cost, and so therefore it needs to be subtracted out.
Okay.
There's not going to be anything that complex, I promise you, on the final exam.
Professor, I also have a question on this question 1. So can I do decision tree to answer the question?
You could.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do not have to use like costs and benefits, right?
Well, you're still using costs and benefits. You're just designing the model. It just looks a little bit different. You should come to the same answer.
Yeah, I get the same answer, but I did not calculate the benefits like separately. I just like calculate the total cost, I think. So that is also okay, right?
Yeah, I mean it's another way to go about it. Yeah.
Okay.
Just not one that we covered. Summer?
Could you go over revealed preference methods like shadow pricing, hedonic pricing, and inversion costs?
Yeah, so it's not super clear on the PowerPoint, but when I say shadow pricing, that's like the overarching category. Like hedonic pricing, travel costs, aversion costs, those are all subsets. Yeah. And the key with, any of the revealed preferences methods is that it's based on actual observation, on actual human behavior, as opposed to what humans say they would do. And so economists always treat that as a more accurate estimate. But then going back to what Gabe was asking earlier, they can't get at non-use value. Is that good? Okay. Alexis?
Hi, so I was wondering how prospect theory might be similar or different from the dual systems theory, like if they're supposed to be competing or complementary or something else.
It's more complementary than it is anything else. I mean, prospect theory, when you're talking about prospect theory, the main thing there is, one, we're not very good at probability, and two, we value losses more than we value gains. Dual systems is much more of, we have to make a decision right now versus we have time to consider evidence and deliberate and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of cross-pollination there. right? But they are separate sort of ideas.
Thank you.
Sure, Ibrahim.
So I just wanted to ask to make sure that I have like my understanding is clear. I was wondering about the cost benefit one that we were just talking about. I think I understand. So the benefit part, that part that we come to the 15, that's essentially like, would it be fair to say that in that context, that's essentially how much we would save in the context if we were to build it? So building it,
Yes.
we would knock that amount off. That's why it's a benefit.
Yes.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay, thank you.
All right, Buyer, is your hand just still up, or do you have a new question?
Oh, I got a question on problem set 3.
What is your question?
Oh, question 2. I'm kind of confused about like what is the consumer surplus. Like question 3, the third, like 3C.
Why does it keep showing me this one?
I think it is the same document, just a different question.
Well, no, one's problem set 3 and one is the additional cost benefit questions. All right, so it's question 3. That's what you're asking about?
Yeah. Oh, no. Like, let's question 2. Okay, question 2. Question 2C. Got it wrong. Like question 2C of problem set 3.
Okay. And what was the specific question? I
2C.
mean, I already talked about this some.
Oh, okay. So like.
Oh no. Wait. 2C or
2C. This is like a diagram, like with triangles, the intervention.
right?
So,
I mean, it's a tax.
I know, yeah. The rest you.
And then did it achieve the goal of remedying economic efficiency? I mean, inefficiency? I mean, the answer there is no, because it doesn't get us all the way up to the social cost. It only takes us about halfway there.
But there's a decrease in deadweight loss in the triangle, right?
There is a decrease in deadweight loss, but we don't get rid of deadweight loss.
Oh, thank you. That makes sense now.
Okay. Cloris, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just have a quick question to make sure I understand this correctly. So for the contingent valuation, is that like referencing negative externalities and like how things for like pollution or environmental issues are harder to measure if they're like non-use factors?
Sorry, I completely missed the first sentence, which killed me.
Oh, for the contingent valuation on the study guide, is that referencing like negative externalities?
No. Contingent valuation is essentially using surveys to measure how much we value something.
Oh, okay. So it's like in reference to like willingness to pay. Is it only surveys, or does it also include like the shadow?
No, it's only surveys. It's both the willingness to pay and the willingness to accept.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. TK?
Michelle put in the chat wondering whether we could go over a couple of the topics for the short answer section: behavior econ, critiquing, program evaluation, etc.
We've already gone over a decent amount of that. Is there a specific question within behavioral economics? I just talked about prospect theory and dual systems theory. Um,
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering what exactly, since it's such a broad topic, what exactly would be best? Because you put in parentheses, heuristics. So I was just wondering what specifically um, would be, I mean, like you said, there are multiple theories. So I was just wondering about that.
yeah, I mean, understanding the different heuristics that we talked about, the affect heuristic, the availability heuristic, like those are going to be important. Um, it's essentially a half a lecture of material. Um, but um, but I think the heuristics is probably a good place to focus. And then the critiquing program evaluation, I think looking at the questions on problem set 4 is a good way of seeing how you might have to do that.
Okay, so that's going to be like a problem, like the like cost benefit analysis and cost effective analysis.
No, it's looking at like time series analyses, discontinuity studies, those things.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Ibrahim, did you have another question? Oh, your hand just went down.
Oh, yes, I had another question.
Okay.
I was just wondering, well, I just want to double check that for contingent valuation, the weakness is that depending on whether you ask the willingness to pay or the willingness to be compensated, you're going to get overestimations or underestimations, correct? Because people are going to more than likely overestimate the amount that they're willing to be compensated while they're likely to underestimate. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it, but part of it's just weaknesses in survey designs generally.
Okay. Yes.
And this idea that people will lie and those types of things.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Wu, did you have another question or?
Yes, I have many questions. So the first question is that so contingent valuation can mirror non-use value, right?
It can measure non-use value, yes.
Okay. And another question is about the food stamps. I wonder whether there will be an income effect caused by the food stamps.
There is, but you don't really have to know that.
Okay.
The whole point of that food stamp cash transfer, like cash welfare slide, is just to sort of understand that it's generally more efficient for us to give people cash than it is to do some kind of in-kind transfer.
Okay, so you mean like it is more efficient to use something like a lump sum payment, right? Okay. And another question, it's about the type of goods. So could you explain why fishery is fishery is a common pool food, right? Yeah.
It's a common pool
Could you
resource.
Yeah, could you explain like why it is rival?
Because only one person can catch a fish.
Okay.
Right? Once you catch the fish, nobody else can catch it. So the fish themselves are rival. It's non-excludable, not because we can't literally stop people from fishing there, but because it's really, really expensive and difficult to do so.
Okay. And the air is a purely public good? Like the air we breathe?
Yeah, I mean, I would say generally speaking, yes.
Okay. Um, okay, and the third question is whether Pareto and Calder-Hicks efficiency consider the harms to environment.
Not unless that's explicitly included in the model.
Okay, so they basically only count the
They're just looking
harms.
at private costs.
to
Generally speaking, they're looking at private
private
costs.
costs. Okay.
And then we try to make them look at social costs because those are externalities. But there's no direct relationship
Okay.
between Pareto and environmental costs.
Okay. And another question is about the selection effect, like the difference between the selection effect and selection bias. Are there any difference between that?
Nope.
Okay. And could you explain selection effect again? Because so in the PowerPoint, I saw that selection effect is caused by non-random assignment, right?
Yep. Yeah. Anytime that you're trying to select a control group and you're not doing it randomly, there's the possibility that there is some kind of selection effect, meaning that the people that are chosen for either the treatment or the control group are chosen for some kind of systematical reason. And that results in a selection bias.
Okay. Gotcha. Oh, and what is the problem caused by non-random selection?
You can't control for all the other possible explanations.
Okay. Is there any like specific name for that problem?
Not that I know of. I mean, there may be.
Okay. So what I need to know is just like selection effect or selection bias is just like mainly related to the non-random assignment, but not selection.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you very much.
Sure. I can't tell. Do people have new questions or just hands haven't gone down?
I have a new question. I'm just wondering, what does the applying incommensurable criteria refer to in the study guide?
I did talk about that already. It's looking, at situations where there's not a dominant alternative, and you have to decide which criterion is going to be the most important to you. So, especially with something like political feasibility, where you can't put a monetary value on it, it's not directly comparable to the other categories.
Okay, thank you.
I have some quick questions, like yes or no questions. The first is that does government intervention necessarily lead to or escalate economic inefficiency?
It depends.
Can it remedy economic inefficiency?
Yes.
Economically, yes. Okay. And in the field of public policy, do we consider it impossible to achieve Pareto improving outcomes?
No.
So in what cases can we like achieve Pareto improving outcomes? Do we have to compensate or a basket?
I can't prove the non-existence of a thing. So that's why the answer is no.
Sorry, like it's impossible or not impossible.
I don't know that it's impossible, and there's no way for me to show that it's impossible. What I said in class is that it's highly unlikely.
Okay, okay, got it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I will see you tomorrow at noon. come ready. It's going to be fun. You're going to really enjoy yourself. When you leave, you're going to be like, thank you so much. Yeah. And I hope you have a good evening.
Thanks, Professor.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff. Hayden is asking if it's in the regular room, which it is, right?
It is in the regular room, yes.
Okay, so regular room at noon.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.